button. Uh, Leslie, let me say one thing though. Remember that uh, when we're in share mode, not everyone can see you. So uh, everybody should know they need to speak up if they have a question because she can't see all the participants. So don't just raise your hand, just speak up. Okay, Leslie, sorry.
Okay, now the second, because it went to the beginning of the talk, which is not where I wanted it to go. So hold on a second. I need to tell it to start from the screen we're on. A little bit farther. Okay, play from the current slide. There we
It's an
go.
excellent picture.
Okay, now how many people are here today that weren't here before or that didn't see the thing? I'll just
Alan's new.
Okay, I'll just back up a little bit. So, what we did last time was we talked about brain problems with age. Well, first of all, a definition of what wisdom is, and the one that we're going to use is basically it's the hallmark of age because it results from an accumulation of life experiences. And it requires continued growth in intellectual, social, emotional, and moral development. It leads to greater satisfaction and well being, and it benefits others and society as a whole. So, those are some of the things that we're looking for when we talk about wisdom. And we talked about brain problems with aging, what happens physiologically to your brain, and then what the compensatory wisdom is that you might get to help counteract that brain loss. We talked about brains as dual processors using the logical part of your brain and the intuitive part of your brain together. And then today, we're going to talk about with intuition. Sometimes people are relying on shortcuts and it works. But sometimes they're relying on shortcuts or heuristics that have inherent fallacies, logical fallacies in them. And so we're going to be looking at a few of those because if we're going to be wise, we have to be aware of what they are and sort of be forearmed. I came across this lovely card when I was up in Ashland last weekend and I liked it. Let's see here. Okay. So big deal. We get older, we get wise, but why is it a big deal? So this is about, we're going to go through a few of these shortcuts that people use and what the problems are with them. The first one is called anchoring. And anchoring, you get influenced by a reference point, but that reference point is actually irrelevant. So, for example, if you said, I asked a group of people, and they did all of these psychological experiments on people to come up with these ideas. If you said, you ask people of uh, what is the population, to guess the population of Milwaukee, and those people are from Chicago, that has about 3 million people, they're going to guess a higher number than the people if you ask them from Green Bay, which has a population of about 100,000. They'll come up with a lower estimation. So even though it doesn't matter really what the population of Chicago is or of Green Bay, your guessing is going to be influenced by your point of reference that you heard first. And this comes into consideration when, for example, they set a sticker price for a car or an asking price for a house, or if you're in a courtroom, they're suggesting a long sentence to begin with. It's sort of a bargaining point, but they're assuming that people would be willing and influenced to pay more for the house than they would if they were just looking at logic or more for the car. So the next one is availability. So availability has to do with the frequency with which you have heard about something. So if you ask people, do more people get killed by homicide or by suicide? What would you guys say? Homicide or suicide?
Suicide.
Suicide.
Okay, you guys, hello, Julia. You guys are all too smart. See, this is the trouble. But most people, when they read the newspaper, they're seeing homicide, homicide, homicide. So most people are going to guess that it's homicide rather than suicide because they've heard more about homicide. But actually, there are twice as many suicides as homicides. Okay, this next one is framing, and that's the context in which the choices are presented. So if, for example, you go to the doctor and he says, this surgery that I'm offering you has a 80% chance of success. Are you going to take that offer more than if he says, this surgery I'm offering you has a 20% chance of failure? Julia, what would you take?
Thank you, Leslie.
Julia's getting ready for her surgery. It's exactly the same thing, but it's like when you go to the market and they say this beef is 80% fat free. If they this beef is 20% fat, it's just not quite as appealing. So the framing of the thing is important. The next one is the optimistic bias. And this is a planning fallacy where you overestimate the benefits and underestimate the liabilities of anything. It comes into play when you're buying lottery tickets or if you're remodeling your house. You know, everybody has heard that it costs twice as much and will take twice as long to do any kind of remodeling project. But people still go into a project saying, oh, this is within my budget. You know, this they said it would cost. So the optimistic bias. The next one is going to be the status quo bias, which is where you continue a course of action that has traditionally been pursued without looking into whether or not it's the best thing. And
Mhm.
they use this when they're telling you try our free subscription. It's this subscription to this app is going to be free for the first, 2 weeks, and you can cancel at any time. A lot of people will go for that offer, and they're relying on the laziness of people.
Alert from software update. Software update.
Quiet, Tom.
Okay. Anyway, so they're assuming that people will not notice, won't pay attention, will just go with the flow and will not cancel the subscription for a long time. And also, it's like when you drive the same path to work every day without checking to see if that's actually the best route to go on. Okay, I find it sometimes when I'm going places I go over and over, I don't bother to check, and then I discover, hey, there was a better way to do this. So that would be the status quo bias. Okay, the next one is the herd mentality. And this one we all became familiar with when we were kids, especially maybe about junior high, where you're really influenced by the other people around you. And they did the psychological test they did with this was they gave people two lines to look at. One was obviously longer than the other line, but the people were told that everybody else said they were exactly the same. So people would say, oh, yeah, I see that now. They're exactly. And it also applies to fashions, stock market bubbles. Everybody's buying this stock, you know. Everybody's buying, has to have Tickle Me Elmo for their grandchild for this Christmas present. So people get caught up in the herd mentality. And then the last one, I think, is tribalism and ethnocentrism, which is really, really important and influential. I've been paying a lot of attention to this one lately. It's love and trust for people in our known group and distrust for outsiders. And I think, particularly in this world of global everything, where if you get Ebola in one continent, it's going to affect everybody else. So you can't just stick to yourselves. But often people are only going to be interested in their family, maybe their church group, and all those people are safe, and they're very distrustful of a different group, a different religion, a different political party, whatever. And they don't really listen very carefully. So it's extreme loyalty to a group. Okay. So David Engelman, who's one of the guys who wrote one of the books we were looking at, he said that our emotional wiring makes things that are remote, either in time or distance, seem less important or consequential. And one of the studies they did was with money, and they said, okay, we'll give you $100 now or $110 in a week. Which one are you going to choose? Anybody react to that one? What would you choose?
Well, it's delayed gratification.
Yeah. And so you would probably say, yeah, I can wait a week, right? But if
I'm going to take 100 now. I think that's not a big enough difference.
okay, well, that's good. Okay, and then they changed it and they said, how about 152 weeks and 110 in 53 weeks? Everybody said,
Yeah.
what's
Wow.
why bother,
Yeah.
That was one of them. It applies also to things, and it causes disasters. For example, when people were offered adjustable rate mortgages, they said, wow, great low interest rate now. And they didn't want to think about what might happen later. They weren't considering the consequences later. This also works, Tony, this is for you. When you want somebody to do something, if you say, will you teach this class next week? It's different than if you say, could you do this in next September? They'll say yes to September, but because that's in the distance and they're not thinking about, I'm going to feel just as pressured and just as busy then as I do now. So it works that way. And the other thing is that physical, social, and cultural distance also makes people disassociate from emotional involvement. So we have this thing called the trolley car dilemma, and I'm sure you have heard variations of this. So the idea is there's a track laid out in a Y formation, and a trolley car is barreling down the road, and 5 workers are working on the left side of the Y, and 1 worker is working on the right side of the Y. You have the ability to throw the switch and make it change direction. Right now, it's headed toward the 5 workers. And the question is, what would you do? Douglas, what would you do? You're on mute still.
I don't know. I've always wondered about this problem.
A lot of people will say, well, that's sort of those aren't real people to me. They're just sort of abstract. Mathematically, it's more virtuous to save 5 than 1. So I might throw the switch.
I think I'd yell at the one guy to get out of the way.
Well, and then the next one, they change it and they say, okay, you're seeing this from up on a bridge. And there's somebody right nearby you that has some quality that you consider makes them less human. Okay, this is tribalism coming into play. They're less human. They're old, disabled, smell bad, wearing a frog suit, whatever. And if you push them off the bridge, they will derail the car, and nobody's going to get killed. Would you?
Nobody else.
Yeah. Yeah, nobody else except that person. Would you do that? And interestingly enough, what they found was that if you're actually going to touch the person and they're near you, they become less abstract, and fewer people were willing to do that because they would actually be touching, they would be acknowledging the other person as somebody that was next to them. And then this other one, the Twilight Zone. Do you guys remember the Twilight Zone one about the box? Okay, so in the box, this guy's been sort of down on his luck. He's hard up for money. And the doorbell rings, and there is a mysterious stranger there who talks him into letting him in. And he has this box with a button on it. And he says, all you have to do is push this button, and I'm going to give you $1,000. And the guy says, well, what's happening if I push the button? And he says, somebody that you don't know who lives far away is going to die. And the guy, he agonizes over this decision, and then he gets more in debt. And finally, he pushes the button. And the guy shows up at the door, hands him the $1,000 and says, give me the box back. And he says, well, what are you going to do with the box? Well, I'm going to take it to somebody far away who does it for you. That was the story teaching us that if things are far away and unknown to us, we don't get as emotionally involved. But this is true also with disasters, things that you read about in the paper. For example, with the Camp Fire, which happened right outside of where I live in Chico. I think 85 people were killed. And of course, they were people that some people knew, and it was local, and we saw this and breathed the smoke. And that was front page news for a long time. But in 2023, 62,000 people died in an earthquake in Turkey. And, it was on page 6 or something like that. Those people don't matter as much to us because they are far away, and they're in a different country and a different ethnic group and a different religion. And we just don't react to it as much. And the same thing is, I'll go back, is in war. We're getting into situations now where it's not, originally it was hand-to-hand combat. You knew who you were fighting with. You knew who you were killing. And now we've got drones delivering weapons and other things that are done in an automated way, so that some guy sitting in the desert in, I don't know, is it Nevada, controlling things, and people are blowing up somewhere else, even if it's little girls in a school. And it's all done very, very remotely. So war becomes this more of an abstract, it's almost like a computer game, because in fact, I remember when I was doing some piece work that had to do with how the armed services were recruiting kids. They had this big thing set up, and I believe it was Philadelphia. It was a giant video arcade. They were playing all these games, and they were watching the kids that were really good at it, and then they were making them. Okay, the next one, we talked about natural disasters. So we talked about this book by Thayer and Sunstein called Nudge, and it says improving decisions about health, wealth, and happiness. And they were promoting a thing they called choice architecture. They thought, wow, isn't it great to know about how our brains work, how we have these biases that we just went over? What if we can get the government and other beneficent institutions, businesses, to present information to people to take advantage of these intuitive weaknesses and nudge them into making wise decisions? They actually thought that. So, what could possibly go wrong with that idea? So, nudge goes to push, to shove. And of course, we just have to look at where we are right now.
Yeah.
The tools of fooling people, using their biases of their intuition for your own gain and green and power. You have all these ads. I mean, that's what advertising is, right? It's convincing you to buy something you don't need. And then propaganda for the political campaigns. If you think about, people who study the psychology of how brains work often go into propaganda and advertising. And then the scammers, that's why we are the target. How many people have been approached with some kind of a scam? Anybody?
Oh, always.
Yeah, always. And I have friends. I have an older friend. I was there for a writers group at his house, and he said, I can't hang up the phone. And I said, Mike, why not? And he said, I got a call from these two guys from the FBI, and somebody's, scamming me. And he says they both have foreign accents, and I'm supposed to leave the phone off the hook. I can't contact anybody, but I've got to take this money down to my bank, go to my bank and get this money. And we all said, oh, let's talk about this.
Yeah.
So, but since that, he's the one, they do keep a list. He's gotten the phone call, the grandpa phone call from the grandson, but they actually used AI to use his grandson's voice.
Oof.
And this time he had the sense to call his son and says, is Nick okay? And he says, yes, he's fine. And then he learned from the first time around. Okay, so most of us would prefer to be wise elders rather than old fools, but how are we going to set ourselves on that path? Well, there are two parts of it. First of all, we talked about brain deterioration, but there's some stuff you can do to help with that. So it does take place with age, but they have some recent evidence that new neurons constantly develop out of stem cells, even as we're getting older. So we're losing brain cells, but we are also gaining brain cells. So we got to take care of our brain. Your mind is actually an organ in your body. It's your brain. And anything that's good for the health of your body is good for the health of your brain. So all this stuff, you tell people, get sleep, exercise regularly, eat and drink carefully. And they go, yeah. But that's probably more important than all these things that are advertised, to sell you this brain food for this, all these amino acids. This is going to be brain food for you and all that. So, yes. Okay. Sleep is important. I was talking to somebody just yesterday about this, somebody who was a real go-getter and was getting by on 5 hours of sleep because she could be so productive. But she talked to her doctor who said, she said, I need my thyroid adjusted because I'm tired. And he said, when you have gotten more than 7 hours of sleep every night for a month, come and see me again. And she found out that was the problem. It was really the lack of sleep. So
wait a minute. How old was she?
She's 59. Okay. She's 59.
Yeah, well, I'm 79. I don't give a shit about being productive.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, but the thing is about sleep, it really does.
Yeah.
While you're
Go to
Yeah.
sleep, Tony.
Yeah. No offense, Tony, but it shows.
yeah. So while you're asleep, your brain actually shrinks down, and your spinal fluid goes whooshing through there, and it washes away. This is very scientific language. It washes away the accumulation of the proteins that are causing the plaques and tangles. Okay.
Yeah, that's what Laurel talked about.
That's right. You know, Laurel and I actually agree on the same things. Possibly it's true. Okay. So exercise improves the blood flow to the brain. And so it provides it with more oxygen. So, and they have decided it's not just aerobic exercise that you need, but you need the sudden bursts from doing weight training exercise too, to make your brain stronger. And the best brain foods are the ones that protect your blood vessels. Okay, so leafy green vegetables, fish with omega-3 fatty acids, berries with flavonoids, caffeine in tea or coffee. Walnuts have alpha-linolenic acid, which is a form of omega-3 fatty acid. And the latest studies, you've noticed we've gone through a cultural thing now where it used to be really cool to drink alcohol, and they were saying 1 drink a day was good for everybody of red wine. Everybody remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And now they're saying, oh, maybe not. Those studies about the Mediterranean diet, including red wine, were misguided because it was other factors in play. So drinking a certain amount of alcohol can cause some brain shrinkage. Okay, also social activities actually boost your brain power.
Yay.
Yay! So here we are. Okay. So if you have healthy interactions with other people, you're going to release all those things, the oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, and the endorphins that were decreasing with aging will be increased if you're interacting with people. And it also stimulates attention and memory, and it helps stimulate your neural networks. So, you know how we start losing the ability to recognize people and remember names and stuff like that. The more socializing you do, the more you're going to increase your ability to do that. And then,
Leslie,
yeah,
does this have to be socializing with real people, or can it be communicating actively with online agents and with,
you know,
AI.
that's a good question, because I did hear this thing on NPR about this guy he was a PhD, and he knew better, but he was on some kind of dating site, and he hooked up with this woman who was fascinating and fascinated in him, and this thing was going on for a year, and he kept noticing that her answers skipped over questions that he'd asked, like, when can I come see you, and things like that. And he finally figured out he was talking to AI, that there wasn't actually a person involved. And then we have kids who have, what do they call them, avatar friends who are not
Mm-hmm.
real, that unfortunately can, when you say, I hate my mother, she's horrible, or should I kill her, they might get the wrong answer, because the friend wants to be very, very supportive, the AI friend. So I don't know. I think they said healthy relationships. I'm not sure what do you guys think? If is an AI relationship going to be as valuable as a human relationship, or do you need to have the give and take of a real person without having this entity that's feeding you what they think you want to hear?
I think it might depend on the innate sort of personality and mental makeup of the person. I don't know, I was talking to a friend yesterday, and she FaceTiming, and she'd gotten into this amazing conversation with AI that totally invigorated her, even though she was, aware this wasn't a person, but gave her all kinds of um, energy, really.
Okay, well then that's a good point.
Yeah. I just,
Leslie, this remind going back to the very first slide, your very first slide.
Yeah.
Uh, the One of the things about AI is that it didn't exist like 2 years ago, and all of the wisdom. It makes a lot of sense to pay attention to old people if nothing has changed in the last 5,000 years, which was the case for 99% of all human history,
Yeah.
from the
good point.
beginning of
Yeah.
Homo sapiens to very recently. Nothing changed. I mean, let's say 200 years ago, Industrial Revolution. People used horses, they used ox carts, they didn't have any electronic communication, blah, blah, blah. All of that has been completely revolutionized in the just within the last year. If you want to count from the internet on, the last generation. So the question is that I went through every one of those uh, metrics that you were talking about, or deceptions at the very beginning, and I was thinking every one of them is challenged by artificial intelligence because we have no background, none of us, and I would say nobody at all has any wisdom to share about what AI is doing and what it can do. And
Well,
it's a really brand new world. And all of those fallacies uh, are relevant to that particular development.
okay. This is sort of the same thing you were talking about when we met the first time. And you were talking about how the knowledge of women back in the times when there were tribal wise women who were providing information about specific herbs you could use for healing and things like that. But there's a difference here between knowledge, which is specific facts, and wisdom, which is an approach to thinking. So we're going to be discussing very specifically. I have a new thing that I just added on in between our two sessions because I came across something that was written right now and it has to do with artificial intelligence. So why don't we get through that part and then you can tell me if you think that was applicable to what you're talking about. Does that work?
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
Okay. So the regions of your brain that you need to recognize faces and emotions and make decisions and feel rewarded are exercised and can grow new neurons. Okay, we know we have this brain damage, but we also have growing. So if you participate in mind stimulating activities and you keep learning, as we are right now, hopefully. I mean, what I like about this group is I'm not just learning facts as people give their presentations. But when I'm hearing feedback from people or when they're adding information about experiences they had, that that sort of fine tunes wisdom. You know what I mean? It's not just that we're learning a fact about something, we're listening to how other people are thinking. And the new neurons are manufactured in the walls of the lateral ventricles as undifferentiated stem cells, but they migrate to the place where your brain is thinking. So the parts that you're using in your brain are where the new brain cells go. And here are the examples. They just brought this one up as if it were some kind of new knowledge, but this has been known for quite a long time. That though
Leslie, what are lateral ventricles?
I would have to show you a map of the brain and point it out to you. Laterals on the sides, okay? It's a part of the brain. I'll show you if I could look up a drawing. Okay, so
That's all right. I just didn't not familiar with it.
okay, part of the brain. Have you heard of the hippocampus?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so the hippocampus has to do with turning short-term memories into long-term memories. Um, And it's especially large in the taxi drivers because it has to do also with, so you have these memories, they have to memorize. They used to have tests before we had GPS. This is something you're talking about, Tony, where GPS sort of makes a moot point if you know the map of London in your brain. But they have to memorize all these complex routes. And then also, bilingual people have more gray matter in their angular gyrus. And you're going to ask me where your angular gyrus is, right? Of the left hemisphere. And that's the area associated with language. I mean, what's nice is these days we don't have to do autopsies on people's brains to know which part is getting developed and which part is getting stimulated. You can see these things on scans. And then here's the one for Tony, the Heschel's gyrus, and I knew he'd want to know. It's located in the temporal lobe of the brain, and it's the primary auditory cortex. It processes and decodes incoming sound, okay? It's twice as big in professional musicians
Wow.
as in non-musicians. So, the other thing so first thing we're going to do, there are going to be three things we're going to talk about here to become wise. First is you got to take care of your brain. Do some of the things that will stimulate important parts of it to grow rather than just have this constant deterioration. Second thing is you have to be aware of and challenge the intuitive fallacies. Now, Tony, it would be one thing if it were just a matter of learning knowledge that changes. And it will be harder with AI because we're going to get fooled. I mean, really, really, if you can do deep fakes of somebody giving a speech and you show them and they're not saying what they actually ever said in their lives, that's going to be hard to be dealing with that kind of misplaced information coming into your brain. But if we can think about what the fallacies are, and when we have a reaction, a gut level reaction, and you feel a little bit uneasy about it, then you can use your rational brain to go through it and figure out what you really should do. And then consider the source of the information. And this will be one of the most helpful things because what are they selling? What are they selling you? And why are they selling it to you? What did I read someplace I liked? It said, if you're not being charged any money, then you are the product.
Right.
I had to think about that one for a while, but I
Yeah.
thought, okay, now I understand. So that's one of our main things. We say, follow the money. You
Yeah.
get this big flashy advertisement that's really tearing apart somebody's political opponent. Look on it for the tiny print. Who printed this? Oh, it came from Tom Steyer, and it's chewing up, Becerra. Well, I better look into this and see if this is true. So consider the source. What is the ulterior motive? All of these things still work, even if the facts have changed. If we are now in 2026 rather than 1926, the facts have changed, but these motives haven't changed. So, and consider if our tribal impulses are making us react with fear or suspicion to people who are just different. And I am pleased to say that with experience, I think I'm growing in terms of some of my own, I guess you'd say it was tribal unease with some gender change and stuff like that. I remember the first time I take my grandkids on trips they want to go on when they graduate. I took my oldest one on a trip and we stayed at a place where our table mate was a guy who was now a woman. But to me, it looked like a guy wearing a lot of makeup and long hair. And I wasn't unaccepting, but I was just saying, to my granddaughter afterwards, who says, no, this just feels weird. This is a guy who's wearing, you know, a lot of makeup and a wig, and I'm not entirely convinced. And then my own grandson, next one in line, was my granddaughter and went through that change. And he still has long hair and wears eye makeup and sometimes fingernail polish, but identifies as a male and lifts weights all the time. And I finally got to the point where I really appreciated the signs on the toilets at the Greenleaf Deli in Ashland said for years, maybe 25 years, people, other people. It didn't say men or women. And I've gotten to the point now where I just say, oh, in Ashland, I saw there were lots of people exhibiting signs of every possible gender variation and combination. And I just said, it's people and it's other people. And you don't really have to worry about it. It's okay. So that's sort of one area where my own little narrow definitions of who's us and who isn't us expanded. And it makes life a lot easier.
I think I just ran into a very interesting video. A very intelligent African woman talking about talking about slavery, and she was saying it's crazy that she didn't say that. She was actually very careful in what she said, but basically her argument was that the demonization of white people is ridiculous with regard to slavery. And the reason being that slavery still exists in many parts of the world, and the white people were the first ones to make it illegal. Otherwise, it had gone on for centuries. Anyway, she's going against her tribe to say this. I feel this in two areas very strongly. One is you can't defend men if you're a man. You can't say not all men. That's not permitted anymore. And I find that very interesting, and because my father, well, anyway, forget about personal stuff. And the second thing is the race stuff. You really get into trouble if you defy your tribe and step out of the bounds of what you're supposed to agree with. And this is exactly what got Socrates executed. So a lot of the things you just said, Leslie, my whole life in studying philosophy is studying how people think and examining the fallacies of reason in their whole approach, not just facts, but their whole approach to things. But I really notice it today in the discussions of the patriarchy. You cannot make any comment defending any aspect of the patriarchy if you're a man.
Well, obviously, that is a kind of tribal thinking. It's just that the pendulum is swinging the other direction. No, but I agree with you entirely. So anyway, first thing is we're going to try to build our brains, take good care of our brains. Second thing, we're going to be aware of the intuitive fallacies so that we know when we're going astray. And the third thing that's really important is being a mentor. It not only helps the young person, but as people refine and correct and update their knowledge, they can also learn about things like technology. And it helps you develop your communication skills. I mean, I do reading pals with kids at my local bilingual elementary school. And so I'm learning Spanish. Sometimes we're reading in Spanish. I'm listening to them carefully. I'm collaborating. We're on a team. I'm team building and working with other ones. So when you do something like that, I mean, it's not even just formal teaching. It's any time And I don't think mentoring has to necessarily be a person who is a younger person. It can be somebody in your own age group. And here is for Tony. Tony, we are about to point out that all of this was already said by the Greek philosophers. Okay, so this is the new article that I was just reading because all this earlier stuff is from when I was doing research in 2013. Okay, so this is from 2026, a new thing I was reading. And it was called, it's about the concept of sophrosony, and it's called Why Sophrosony, an Ancient Greek Virtue, Matters More Than Ever in the Age of AI. So that seemed like it would be an important thing to take a look at. And the guy who wrote it, Ross Channing Reed, describes himself as a philosopher and philosophical counselor who researches the connection between virtue and happiness. So, sophrosony, as he defines it, is excellence of character, moderation, self-control, and it's connected to phronesis, which is practical wisdom. Practical wisdom, I think, would sort of go in with this mix of intellect with intuition. That would be practical wisdom. It's contrasted with hubris, excessive pride, dangerous overconfidence, lack of self-insight, which is what I think when you get too much into tribalism. So this is, whoops, a second, I need to go back. He went through in this article, Heraclitus said sophrosony was the most important virtue. Plato said it was the ability to know yourself and to know when you don't know something, which is, I think, the part about keeping an open mind and growing and communicating. And it's the harmony among the three parts of the soul, reason, spirit, and bodily desires. And then Aristotle said it allows people to strike a balance between self-indulgence and self-denial. But it's a virtue that has to be won through training and practice. So that's sort of what we've talked about before, in that wisdom is the constant reevaluating of your first gut level intuitive reaction to something by using logic and perhaps collaboration with other people. He said it was sound-mindedness or wisdom is not inborn but must be learned, which is why we're pretending that as older people, we have done this, we have developed some. And in the 1960s, Edith Hamilton, whom most of us probably know from being a mythologist, and Huntington Cairns, they said sophrosony was no longer among our ideals. And the author of this article, Reed, said, it's really true now. That's really true now in the age of social media and AI. And he points to incivility, the road rage, and cyberbullying, the lack of reflectiveness, the thing that people are not vetting their information sources and they're buying into conspiracy theories, and the lack of integrity, passing off AI-generated work as your own, are all results from the lack of sophrosony. So the consequences don't only affect your local people, your friends and your families and your co-workers, but it is affecting democracy, because if you don't have sound-mindedness, excessive pride and overconfidence hurt you when you have you don't have a reasoned dialogue and you don't respect each other's differences. And a major cause of the loss of sophrosony, he thought, was the decline of mentoring relationships. That people now have replaced real mentors with celebrities and heroes. And I'm noticing this among a lot of young people. They don't really have mentors who are examples that are worthy of emulation. They have
Fantasies.
Yeah, I'm not going to go into specific people I've seen recently. So you need temperance, moderation, self-control, and discernment, which equals excellence of character that can't be faked, like on AI. And becoming such a person, which we will call a wise elder, requires um, guidance and the practice and consistency. And the decline, oh, I already did that one, just a second. So being a wise elder rather than an old fool is an ongoing journey. It takes a lot of time and effort. And here are the things we wise people are going to recognize. Nobody, no one person is as wise as all of us together, which is why we're here together. We need to learn from each other. And I heard this, this was I was on YouTube looking at something else, and they gave me a bunch of Harvard graduation speeches. And this guy who was really cool, he started out by saying, "My life is like a bad joke where there's a Jew and a Christian and a Muslim walk into a bar." But he was talking about his family makeup was, you know, his mother and father and his grandfather were those three different re religions. And the name of his talk was "Listen Like You Might Be Wrong." And I thought, oh, I'm going to remember that one. Listen, might be wrong. Like you don't know it all. There's still something to learn.
What was the
And
joke? Did I miss the joke?
yes, Tony, you did. Okay. It's just
I need coffee.
so anyway, basically it's wisdom isn't a solitary endeavor, I don't think. It requires a lot of feedback, and we should be helping each other as we follow this path, searching for wisdom. So at this point, bing, I'm going to stop the share and look at you guys instead, which is much nicer. And I just wondered if people, okay, Tony, any further thoughts?
Well, this is kind of my entire study of philosophy is being covered in this hour, and so I'm not, I don't know where to start.
Okay.
But what I just said was about tribalism. I think is important for us, and also that last list of wisdom and everything, and all the things that are going wrong that when nobody has sofa sune. Of course, that's everybody else. That's not us. We're still wise. We look at everybody else as looking at, idols, false idols, and movie stars, but we don't. We're smart. That the whole list is a list of flattering things for ourselves
I don't know. I
and
don't have,
accusations of other people.
but I don't have culture heroes as my personal heroes. If you ask me who are the wise, I know some people who are really wise, who have been
Well, that's
astonished.
because you're wise. You don't
No,
do what
no,
the other people. You're accusing other people of, following whoever, what the Brittany or somebody. I'm dating myself. Jennifer Lawrence. You're accusing everybody else of doing that, and you're saying you're wise and you're not doing that.
no, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying people who want to have a wise culture, you do want to have people who have been thinking and trying hard to think carefully all along to avoid some of the natural intuitive fallacies, to be more inclusive, to people who have really made an effort to break down some of their own barriers and listen carefully to other people, that those people should be working harder to be mentors. And maybe so that there are kids who, I was just reading my grandfather's, he had made a tape for me way, way, way back when. And he was talking about, he grew up in the Wild West and he did not have a great, I mean, people were shooting off guns and hanging people and marching down the street with people's heads cut off and all this stuff. And then he told about how this one family took him under their wing and they would take him to Catalina with other young people and they acted as mentors. And I could just tell that was a catalyst for him. You know, that I think everybody in here can think of somebody who was a mentor to them at some point regarding something. And it wasn't a soccer hero or a pop singer or anybody like that. It was a person they actually knew who helped them see things a different way. Don't you think that's true? I'm not saying that
I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but in order for me to identify somebody who I believe is a good mentor and is wise, I would already have to have those qualities myself.
No, I don't think you do.
It's Meno's paradox. How do I identify somebody's wise unless I already know what wisdom is? How do I identify them?
I would say because when I have met these people, I would say, wow, they are showing me something very different from myself that I didn't know, that I really didn't know. I was able to listen like I didn't know it all and recognize here is something new that's valuable. So I disagree with you.
I don't know. Often, when I recognize something like that, it's somebody has presented me with an argument that's the opposite of what I thought before, but my ability to recognize that it makes sense is something that I already possessed. That the argument makes sense. The contrary argument to what I believed makes sense. The ability to do that is already something I possessed.
What about human nature?
Did you possess it when you were 14, or did you work on it and develop
Well,
it?
I possessed the ability to do that when I was 14, yes. The ability is what I had. Not any specific argument, because you recognize that argument was wrong, but how did you recognize it? Because you had the ability, you had the wisdom to realize when you were wrong. That's something that you didn't learn from that guy. You already possessed it. And he presented you.
The guys that I was just quoting were saying, no, it is something you have to practice and it takes training. Those were your.
Well, I think that's true.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that you can be told it. It means you have to practice it yourself. And I'm not sure how you practice it if you just repeat something that somebody else has said. You have to practice that habit. The whole project of philosophy is just practicing that habit that you're talking about.
Right. Which is what basically this talk was about.
Yeah.
I don't think we disagree. Does anybody have some other questions, disagreements, insights?
Well,
go ahead, then Julie, and then Otis.
Okay.
what?
You want to say something? Then I'm going to say it after you.
I was just thinking what about, is that an innate thing with people that needs to be also nurtured and accepted versus shut down as people are, as the human being is growing and developing?
Well, they specifically said in the information that they were giving in these books that they didn't think it was innate, but it was something that was developed through experience, trial and error, learning new things. So I don't know about innate in terms of, I think there are some people who, they talk about babies who are born wise, little old men or whatever. There are some people who seem to have a lot more than other people at an early age.
That's true.
So what I wanted to say was that I'm not disagreeing or agreeing with the talk, but something that I've found very important to me as I get older is role models of people my age or older who I'm impressed by and and therefore want to be more like them. And maybe they're mentors to me. I don't know. I'm thinking there's one woman who is an avid botanist who goes out and looks at the things in the field and writes a blog about it. Another is a 81-year-old politician who just went to Turkey, just decided I'm going to go to Turkey. He spent two weeks traveling in Turkey. There's a woman who's a professional storyteller who tells stories to people in prison. And then there's another woman who's, I believe, 88 years old who became a passionate advocate for right to die laws after she witnessed her own husband's very long, unfortunate struggle. And I don't go to these people and say, well, what should I do about this and that? I think they all have similar political views to me. They're liberal and they're not intolerant people, but what they believe is not so important to me as what they do. And that to me, I think is a really important part of how I conduct my life.
I think you've just talked about there's no difference between role models and mentors, I don't think.
Yeah.
I think it's the same.
Well, and I think what Otis said is really important because it's the outward signs of these inward characteristics that help us judge whether someone is wise, is a thoughtful mentor, is kind, is engaging. And that's what we have to go on. And there are pretty obvious signs that you can use that someone is living a life that's admirable in ways that you might want to learn from and imitate.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, just sort of like, so if you meet kids who only have admiration for culture heroes, it would be nice for them to also interact with people who they say, oh, I think that person does things in a way I would like to be like that. I mean, that's but I think it's important just to help them have those interactions. And just like you, I could name specific people that I have known within the last 10 or 15 years that I just say, that's such a cool person. I want to do it that way.
It seems to me that when we try to define wisdom, there's that element of knowledge that can be passed on. If I want to sail with a group around the world in a sloop, I want to talk to Tony and get the practical wisdom of having experienced that at length and in depth and be able to convey a lot of important practical information. And as opposed to what are the keys to having a satisfying life? How should you treat other people? Those sort of issues of ethics and valuing and self-reflection that are different from practical knowledge. And as people, you and Tony have pointed out in this discussion, if technology stays pretty much the same, then elders can offer you a lot of practical knowledge. But if technology is changing at a rapid pace, their wisdom and experience is no longer admired. And, one of the most painful examples of that for me is I have this friend that I've known practically all my adult life, who is a Navajo, lives on the Navajo reservation, speaks English with a Navajo accent. It's his first and primary language. He grew up in a religious family. He apprenticed to be able to lead the Blessing Way ceremony, which is this extraordinary ceremony that is used when people are going through life changes, like a girl's first menstruation, or if people are trying to get over an addiction, something like that. And, it makes me extremely sad. He and I talk often on the phone, and none of the young people want to speak Navajo anymore. Even in Lukachukai, where he lives in the heart of the reservation, they don't understand him. He has to go to the senior center for, to be able to speak Navajo to other people who are in their 80s. And nobody is going through these ceremonies anymore. And people are not really that interested in the traditions or how to weave a rug and stuff, like how to raise sheep. And it's like he has what I consider to be so much traditional wisdom that is heartbreaking because nobody around him values it.
I would
And
like, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
so, but on the other hand, that's really different, I think, than a person who can talk to you about what is, when you near the end of your life, what are the things that you consider as being the most valuable sort of things that make your living, so that at the end of your life you can say, I'm satisfied with how I've lived, and I lived according to these values, and I found that these kinds of personal relationships, and then the subject of love always emerges in as an element of wisdom. How do you express love? How do you experience love? Why do so many people feel like the experience of friendship and love is more important than money at the end of their lives? I mean, it's a really, really different kind of wisdom. Um, I, I don't think that we can ever define it adequately.
You brought up some important points. One of them was they had, what was that Greek word for practical wisdom, as part of wisdom, but not the only part of wisdom. But I wanted to read you guys this quote that somebody sent me. I couldn't make it into a slide because my lack of knowledge kept me from, it wouldn't send as a email to myself, so I couldn't make a slide. But it said a society that forces a 90-year-old to use a smartphone in order to access basic rights is not a modern society. It's a society that has decided to cast aside its own elders. By 2026, everything has become an app, a code, a portal. Yet the very people who built this country with their own hands now find themselves illiterate in their own homes. If booking a medical appointment or paying a bill requires the help of a son or granddaughter, assuming there is one, then the system has failed. This is not innovation, it's exclusion. Technology should serve people, not determine who is still entitled to dignity. When we leave behind those who came before us, we are not evolving. We are merely becoming more comfortable and more selfish. That was from somebody named Mark Herring, and it was sent as a Facebook post to somebody, and I'm not on Facebook, but I just thought that might sound like it's old people complaining that they can't keep up with the technological advances, but it's a good point to think about. Maybe our culture is negating the value of their elders by making them illiterate in technology. And
I don't think that's an intention that to eliminate the elders. It's just the
but they
way
don't
things
care.
go.
Yeah.
But
When I was,
they,
I've been a musician my whole life. What happens to musicians is you become a big star for 5 years, and then you're complete trash for the rest of your life. This is the way of the world. People do get old and become irrelevant. That's always been the case, but it's more. I mean, the Indian tradition. Remember Little Big Man, when the guy goes up on the hill to die,
yes.
and then fails uh, in dying. There were Native American societies that just left people to die. Uh, you're going to be old and irrelevant at a certain point. That's fine with me. As a matter of fact, I enjoy being irrelevant. But I don't think society has any obligation to serve people who are no longer functioning people and can't really contribute that much. You know, yeah, certainly support them so that they can live. But I don't think that they need to have some kind of honor bestowed upon them because they've counted a high number of times they've traveled around the world, the sun. I don't think you get automatic respect for that.
Oh, darn.
But that's different than getting your basic needs met.
Well, yeah, you definitely should
If you
have that.
if you have to learn to use an app that,
But
maybe you're not only old, but you don't speak English well, then you have to use an app to get your Snap check. It's like, screw that, just
Well,
get it.
that's
And the point
unfortunate,
is
but
that
there's
you're weakening the society if you negate
Agreed.
the elders. You
why,
weaken
why,
the society, not just
how,
the elders,
in
but
what way is society weakened?
because older
Take a
people,
look around you.
older people know things and understand how.
What do they know? What do they know?
Can
Tony-
somebody mute Tony?
Yeah. So some of it, I help a lot of older people with navigating medical stuff. So on my my chart, which is one of these portals, I have 3 other people on there whose stuff I oversee because they can't do my chart. They can't change their appointment, read what the doctor said to them, do all of that stuff. And as I said, I went up to Ashland and they had changed their system of ticketing so that you could not use a paper ticket. You had to use the app on the phone. And the app required, I counted it, 7 different clicks to get to the place where your ticket showed with the little thing that's going to read on the thing. And so they had this long line of all these people who, because the people who have the money to go to Ashland are usually in their 70s and 80s, right? And they're all sitting there with their phones like this. And so they get to the person and the line's long because the person has to go click, 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 and then they can get their ticket and do it. And I'm saying, why was that a smart thing to do?
Somebody's making money off it.
But somebody bought a system.
Considering the things that people have suffered in the history of humanity, the Holocaust, slavery, this seemed like a very minor inconvenience. If I'm going to complain about the fact that I need somebody to help me with my phone app, as opposed to they're going to sell my family away and make my wife into a sex slave, I think I'll go with the, hey, could you help me with this phone app? It's just not that big of a deal.
Tony,
I don't
have
think
you
we're
heard the
suffering.
word?
I don't think we're suffering that much.
Actually, people are being made much more isolated. I would like to argue that older people, people who speak different languages, people with disabilities are being marginalized and they're not being included in the society, and they do suffer from that.
Well, it's not new. They've always been marginalized.
Well,
I'm
I
not
think,
saying it's a
Leslie,
good
that
thing.
the society is also losing out if these people are marginalized and they can't contribute because they're sort of stuck. I mean, I'm of different minds about all of this stuff. But one thing I was thinking about, I don't know about, say a mentor on an ongoing basis, but today something popped into my mind that goes back to Pomona days that I guess has always rattled around in my mind, something a professor said. And I really thought it was it's great when these things have come up, we've discussed, the issues about recent racism or anti-Semitism at Pomona and all these committees and what should you do and blah, blah, blah. And I was talking to a friend of mine from law school on the phone today who I do think of as being in a slightly different generation than I am, because he's like 83 and went to law school a little bit later. And every once in a while he's asking me stuff like, what's going on at Pomona today? And I said, I don't know that much, because everybody's worried about how the college president should deal with these racist things and blah, blah, blah. And what popped into my mind was I don't know if the econ professor was there when most of you were there, because I think he came a little bit later, named Ted Sukahara. One day he walked into class and said, I have had an interesting experience. He said, I was coming across the quad to get to class and somebody stopped me because they thought I was part of the gardening crew about doing something. And that was to me, I remembered that then and I've remembered it now. That was a really good way to show a class about sort of subtle racism. But he also didn't say, so let's cancel the class and talk about this all day. He was sort of like, whoa, here we are. It's 1969 and somebody's still doing this. But he kind of let it settle and then we did our class. And I've never forgotten this, and it made me, I was saying to Chuck, I wish that, when you see it say something, would come up more with peers and professors when they see things at Pomona. So I'm not sure I'd say that this guy was a mentor to me in other respects. I mean, he wasn't my thesis advisor. He didn't interact that well, but I try to collect when somebody says stuff that I file away in my mind that I think has been valuable. And that really was. So anyway, that was, and I mean, just going back to my friend Chuck, who in some ways really does live, I think people who didn't live through our part of the 60s, I mean, he went to Vietnam. He was a classics major at Penn and then got a master's in classics and then signed up for the Marine Corps. And I'm not sure why. I mean, he came from this affluent Jewish family in New York. But anyway, he took his Latin book to Vietnam and he read Latin every day while he was being a lieutenant, and then he was wounded and then he got better and he was on an easier thing. And so fast forward, it's 2026, he still reads Latin every day, which I kind of admire. The fact that he can't set up his Netflix, which we gave him for an 80th birthday present, and he's watching Seinfeld reruns. I don't admire, but he said to me today, I was reading my Latin, and there was a phrase I really couldn't understand. I read it 8 times, and I could put the words together. I don't know what it meant. I put it into AI, and AI explained, what the meaning was, whichever philosopher that Tony would know and I wouldn't said this meant by it. And then Chuck could kind of move on. He closed up his AI and went back to reading Latin. And I thought that was a great mesh of, kind of being an older person and, using the tools to the extent you can.
Well, I'd hate to cut it short, but I just noticed it's past 20 after. And I've got to get someplace else, and I imagine you do too. Okay. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you.
Attending, and so we're going to hear from Alice next, right? I'm looking forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Les.
Leslie,
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.